All right,
Thank
so
you.
Dr. Ladrica Menson Furr is an associate professor of African and African American Studies at the University of Memphis. She is the author of August Wilson's Fences and August Wilson's Joe Turner Come and Gone. And I just want to say I first met Ladrica at the August Wilson Society, the conference. I think that was 2018, 2019.
I think it was
I think it was 2019.
2018.
2018.
2018. It was 2018. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was just like, I've been following you ever since.
You're
So,
so kind. Oh my
I
goodness.
definitely, when I decided to have this, I said I definitely have to have Ladrica part of this. So
Oh,
I'm looking forward to it. So the floor is open to you.
okay. Well, thank you, and thank you all for joining in, and for those who are going to come. First of all, I want to begin, and so I have a script, Patrice, but I really prefer not to read from a script. So if I tend to meander, you all charge it to my heart and not to my head. Wilson's work is and that's, I hope that's the spirit and a theme that will come through in what I want to share with us today in this discussion. And I do very much want it to be a discussion, Patrice. So I love the way that you have been navigating the conversations. So if I get to a lull, please interject questions, comments from any of you all. But Wilson's work is I think, like all of us, is a spiritual experience, right? And so when I write about him or when I speak about him, um, it's hard sometimes not to realize, it's hard not to personalize it. So if you all will allow me for a little bit of time, because when Patrice told me I had like 40 minutes, like, oh, I don't know if I could do 40 minutes, but we'll see how the spirit moves us, and it'll go from there. So let me begin more formally. Um, you know, when Patrice extended the invitation to me, I kept thinking, and I said, okay, but what do you want me to write about? And so when she agreed I could talk about Fences and Joe Turner's Come and Gone, I thought, well, this is such a blessing, because those are the two books, the two plays that I have been afforded the opportunity to spend probably the most amount of time with, from a scholarly perspective, along with the entire American Century Cycle. But at the same time, those plays for me, and again, this is where I'm about to get, I guess, kind of personalize it. So those plays have really served as my own kind of working personal and professional bookends, if I can use it that way. And the research that we've studied, the great scholars who have helped us to become better Wilsonian interpreters and appreciators, talk about the bookend plays, right? Talk about the bookend. So I'm going to borrow that image and borrow that ideology to talk about Mr. Wilson. So it's truly an honor, you all, to celebrate Mr. Wilson's birthday today. Um, Again, I'm humbled by Patrice and the August Wilson Consortium for inviting me to participate in this amazing event and to learn from the wisdom that has been shared today. It's been an honor to have been logged in since the beginning, and to note how you've done a brilliant job of having the practitioner, right? The theater practitioner, the Wilsonian actor, the Wilsonian scholar, dramaturgist, and then the Wilsonian critic, Chris, whose work I've used in my own work. So Patrice, thank you for the way you've arranged this. And then now to allow me the space to talk about what I'm going to consider to say, my indebtedness to Mr. Wilson, his dramatic legacy, this Wilsonian community, and it's offered me a path to African-American theater, theater history, cultural history. And if I may borrow from Wilson, the blood's memory that has enabled me to revel in a continuous journey to finding my song, highlighting the songs of my culture. So if I had to give today's talk a title, it would be Fences and Joe Turner's Gone, Lessons on How Not to Be Sorry for Nothing I've Done, to borrow from Wilson, how not to be sorry for nothing I've done, because what Wilson's work has done for me, you all, is taught me to stand on my own ground. It's taught me to not be afraid of the voice that I've been given. So before I go more into that, though, and this is a perfect segue from the wonderful conversation with Khalid and Melonnie. I have to begin my presentation with the words of literary artist Zora Neale Hurston. At the conclusion of The Eyes of Watching God, she has her protagonist, Janie Crawford, say to her best friend, Phoebe Watson, "You got to go there to know there." Janie uses these 8 words to simply sum up a lesson that Hurston teaches, and that suggests Wilson, that connects to Mr. Wilson's American-centric cycle. One has to go on a journey through Wilson's plays to find oneself, or as noted in Joe Turner's Come and Gone, one song. Janie Crawford discovers her truth and identity, surviving and thriving through love, disappointment, heartache, loneliness, and then finally discovering her truth. Wilson's American-centric cycle accomplished this in its amazing template form, this same necessary task, and leads us through the same lesson. Hence, from his first commercial success, the celebrated Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, to the final chapter, Radio Golf, Mr. Wilson offers a ladder and hammer to simultaneously construct a fence and then to climb over that fence when it attempts to consume you. Using fences in Joe Turner's Come and Gone as co-discussants, I hope we can talk about how these 2 works, along with the entire American-century cycle, are muses, sages, teachers, and continue to go before Wilson's readers, particularly me, to pave the way to self-cultural completion and authenticity. Fences, the beginning, or rather my first encounter. Wilson's Fences serves as the foundation of my journey as a scholar into Wilson's work, and later my maturation into real adulthood. I read this play in an anthology in my first graduate school course, Modern American Drama at Louisiana State University in the summer of 1993. A freshly conferred graduate of Spelman College, I began graduate school a month after commencement. That was probably the craziest thing I ever did. And Professor William Damastis introduced me to a play and a dramatist that would literally change my life. In Fences, I saw my grandfather, my father, my uncles. I learned about the complexities of marriage and really began to see the movement and effects of the Great Migration. I remember being upset at the time that Rose remained with Troy in spite of his infidelity and Raynell's conception. And then for years struggling with trying to understand why and how she immersed herself within the church as she made Troy, and I quote, a womanless man. However, did I know that Wilson was then teaching a young 22-year-old scholar who was uncertain if she really wanted to pursue a doctoral degree, the ways of the world of her family, and later herself. As I continued to read Wilson's plays and devour the scholarly discussions and critiques of his work composed by Wilsonian scholars such as Dr. Sandra Shannon, whose literary biography, The Dramatic Vision of August Wilson, became the sacred text that I still consult. The works of Kim Powers, Harry Elam Jr., and his seminal Past is Present in the works of August Wilson, and Alan Nadle's imperative essay collections, including May All of Your Fences Have Gates. Fences continue to be the piece that would enable me to cross the fence into Wilsonian space and join the conversations both first in my dissertation and then later in my first publication. As I composed the latter, August Wilson's Fences, I remember being afraid to approach the text on my own. What more could I say about my scholar women tour and mentors had not written about Wilson, right? That Wilson had not explained himself. Then I thought of something that I was beginning to discern about Wilson's works. His work allowed me to situate it within my own space, my truth, and locate it within the perspective that I had. Thus, when it was completed, that first text presented a version of Wilson's beautiful life, a summary of his works, analysis of the play, but in the final chapter, I was able to locate Fences at the juncture where I was at that point in my life, and that was in Memphis, Tennessee. I wrote that Fences set in 1957, beginning in 1957 rather, anticipates the civil rights movement and activities that would take place during the decade of the 60s. Set 2 years prior to Lorraine Hansberry's Raising the Sun, the drama also was set 11 years before the 1968 Memphis sanitation workers strike and Dr. King's assassination on the balcony outside of room 206 at the Lorraine Hotel. As I read and revised my discussions of Troy, I could not release his activism as he challenged the placement of Black men on the back of the rubbish trucks instead of being able to drive the truck. In this protest element of the play, Wilson infused a future historical event set within the American South into the Pittsburgh Hill District and constructed a road that connected Troy back to the South via King's impending legacy and resonated that warrior spirit that his characters, male and female, embody, employ, and use as they effect changes within their families, communities, and more importantly, within themselves. It is no mistake that Fences was not the first play to garner Wilson's success, but it is the work that shored his continued success and determination to not be a one-play playwright. It is the work that he had to write to prove to the critics that he could compose a work that responded to Western standards as it told those same standards to kiss its black bottom, to borrow from Ma Rainey and allow the Maxon family to reflect its fight for the Black American dream and to safely exist and carry its own. This is found in Rose's I don't have nothing declaration. It's found in Troy's choicelessness to swoop down on Gabriel's disability check to provide a home for his family. And later it's found in Little Raynell's conception and birth. This little ray of sunshine, as Harry Elam Jr. symbolizes, hopes that the fence that Troy finally completes without his son's or his best friend's assistance because he has run them off, will be both a form of protection and something to project from as Troy's legacy continues in both his sons and his daughter. They all know his song, that was his father's song first. And as the character's concluding dialogue proves, that forgiveness and acceptance lead to change. Fences' opening epigraph reads, Troy's sin, Troy's father's sin. I'm sorry, if I can summarize it and paraphrase it, Troy's sins, Troy's father's sins can end now on the day of Troy's funeral. Fences was my beginning to understanding and seeing the lives of the men whose stories that I did not try to understand presented on the page. It prophesied and prepared me for my own broken marriage and spiritual rebirth. I did not know that when I began my journey as a Wilson scholar, that I would find solace within Wilson's work some 20 years later. Fences became the portal into the me search that Wilson's American Century Cycle compels us to do. But it affects you when you are ready to open the fences' gate or jump over into yourself and your song. Joe Turner's Come and Gone. Wilson's American Century Cycle prepares you to find your song, to locate your song, to embrace your song and walk to the specific rhythms. This is more than a fact. Joe Turner's Come and Gone setting predates Fences by 46 years. And Wilson was writing this play as Fences was making his way from Yale Rep to Broadway. When studied, presented, and coupled together, these two works reveal an interesting thread, again, using Elam's brilliant reading of the past as present within Wilson's canon. In this work, Harold Loomis and his 11-year-old daughter, Zonia, have traveled from Tennessee to the Pittsburgh Hill District in search of Harold's closure and awakening, or rather, reawakening. In order to begin this awakening, Loomis was first wrestled with the brokenness that he had suffered due to a forced period of convict labor enslavement. He can only begin this journey, unbeknownst to him, though, by first returning to his past. He will be guided to this past, as we all know, through the guidance of Bynum. Named after Wilson's grandfather, Bynum will guide Loomis and Joe Turner's audience through the waters filled with loss and uncertainty and into an ability to bleed and stand for themselves within the sounds of their own lights and songs. Loomis prepares the way for Troy, for his fellow Southern migrant, to sing his song without apology. Now, in a 1987 interview with David Sarabin asked Wilson if there was a favorite of his plays, and Wilson responded, and I'll paraphrase, no, it's like comparing your kids. He claims them that they're all mine. But then he goes on to explain, I quote, so I think Piano Lesson is my best. After that, it would be Joe Turner and then Fences. Then I was able to get more through in Joe Turner among my plays. However, Fences is the odd one, more conventional in structure with his large character. I kept hearing Ma Rainey described as oddly structured and thought, I can write one of those plays where you have a big character and so everything revolves around him. But then he says, I like Joe Turner for the ideas and for Loomis's accepting responsibility for his own salvation and his own presence in the world. Those kinds of statements are not present in Fences. So of the three, I like Joe Turner best. I hope it shows a growth and a maturing. End quote. This maturing, or rather maturation that Wilson talks to with Mr. Sarabin, is what his work challenges us all to do, to grow, evolve, move forward, but by first equipping ourselves with the cultural, historical, and spiritual tools of armor that begins the African and African-American cultural past. As Loomis finds his song, Wilson provides a metaphorical connotation of and method a guidebook for the individual to reconcile themselves with the very selves that they have been constructed for them, by them, and through their very own existences. The responsibility, if I can emphasize that word, that Wilson applauds Loomis for possessing is the goal and the personal activism that is needed to move forward and stand on one's own. While this lesson is demonstrated by Loomis and Bynum as his leader, teacher, using the Socratic guide into selfhood, its effects are not lost on the other characters as they witness Loomis's reawakening. We must remember that Zonia, his daughter, is bearing witness to her father's reconciliation and the sacrifice that he makes as he hands her to Martha, her mother, because he does not want her to be a half person in his life. It also impacts Molly Cunningham, the female character who once desperately sought out Bynum's assistance to bind her man back to her. But I hope she sees in Loomis a new light, a new type of love for oneself that only can come from acceptance of responsibility. And I mean, I'm sorry, that was Maddie, not Molly. Yes, she runs out of the boarding house's door as Loomis departs, but I read her to be on her own path to being a reconciled individual also. Fences and Joe Turner, you all share amongst the several things, the important theme again of responsibility. In Fences, Troy's understanding of responsibility is connected to providing and standing steadfast in one's actions. His exchange to Corey is callous, but like many of the men in my own family who did not learn to love or how to express love, it is expressed in the manner that Troy can only use. Then we have to ask, then as he asks Rose to assist him in rearing Raynell, he further demonstrates this responsibility, or rather his understanding of it. However, in Joe Turner's, the lesson of accepting one's responsibility is first introduced. Wilson explains to Sarah his goal as he portrays Black men. Wilson said, I'm trying to write an honest picture of the Black male in America. I try to present positive images, strong Black male characters who take a political stand, if only in the sense of Loomis and Joe Turner. One, Joe Turner's come and gone, it ain't gonna happen no more. Two, I don't need anyone to bleed for me. I can bleed for myself. I can accept responsibility for my presence in the world. The idea of responsibility is crucial because I believe, as Wilson says, white Americans basically see Black males as irresponsible, which I think is incorrect. They say you should be responsible in the same way we are, without understanding that we have different ideas of responsibility. And I think that's what he employs through Troy. I try to point my characters so they're pointed toward the future, Wilson continues. I try to demonstrate the spirit of the character. It's the same with Troy. He wrestles with death. I try to make them heroic. I've experienced it. I'm trying to uncover it, pulling layer after layer from the stereotype, end quote. Although Wilson points his male characters toward the future, he accomplishes the same again for all of his students. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and Fences were my first introductions to Wilson, but Joe Turner's is the play, like Loomis, that reawakened my scholarly soul. Teaching, researching, and then writing about this play in the space of its musical and geographically influenced title and play has taught me that there is truly a higher order organizing our lives, our songs, and that this being's power is intentional, if I may emphasize that word. Just as Wilson is intentional, Joe Turner's, as our writing teacher, is a Southern-born play. It's a Memphis, Tennessee play. It's a blues-inspired play. It's an African retention play. It's a spiritual play. It's a work that Wilson continued to identify as his favorite play because it, at its least, for the earlier portion of the cycle, serves as the depot upon which they will allow, converge, and emerge. Jim, which will become later, fully imagines and introduces Bynum's female contemporary, Aunt Esther, who will usher the first of the canon souls of the city of Bones to cleansing, healing, acceptance of responsibility, and to emerge as its first shining man. Then Joe Turner via Bynum proves that 11 years later, the same spiritual cleansing, again imagined, must be taken. Ma Rainey is often considered the outlier, even as Wilson calls it, proves that it's not because Wilson continues this identification of acceptance and responsibility. Then Piano Lesson and Seven Guitars picks up the momentum when characters such as Boy Willie and Floyd Barton and Ruby know their songs, their identities, and aren't afraid to fight to secure them. Then we meet, as I've already mentioned, the quintessential Troy Maxson and Rose Maxson, who both accept responsibility for their actions and inactions and fight to hold on to their individual truths. First, when Troy conceived a child with his mistress, Alberta, and failed to practice, as I call it now, self-care because of his commitment to responsibility, he asserts to define and explain his space. And if I may, I'm not an actor, you all, but you never can talk about fences or talk about responsibility or talk about the change that Wilson brings about, you all, without this quote. Troy says, "I'm talking, woman, let me talk. I'm trying to find a way to tell you I'm gonna be a daddy. I'm gonna be somebody's daddy." Then Rose responds, and then Troy responds, "It ain't about nobody being a better woman or nothing, Rose. You ain't to blame. A man can ask for no woman to be a better wife than you've been. I'm responsible for it. I done locked myself into a pattern trying to take care of you all, that I forgot about myself." And then one of Troy's last response, "A man's got to do what's right for him. I ain't sorry for nothing I done. It felt in my heart, right in my heart." Now, Rose's counters to Troy's declarations, I guess you say, of independence and responsibility also demonstrate how Wilson, who at the time claimed he didn't, wasn't focused so much on writing women as well as he wrote men, or he didn't attempt that because he respected the voice from which he came. Rose counters were equally powerful and challenging rebuttals. First, when she says, "And I ain't never wanted no half nothing in my family. My whole life is half. Everybody got different fathers and mothers. My two sisters and my brother can't hardly tell who's who, can't never sit down and talk about papa and mama. It's your papa, your mama, and my papa and my mama." Then Rose, as she responds to Troy trying to defend his space or still in second, "Don't you ever think I ever wanted other things? Don't you think I had dreams and hopes? What about my life? You're not the only one who's got wants and needs." And then one of the most last, one of the most important, but definitely not one of the least powerful moments. And I've alluded to this earlier, when Rose says, and this is when Troy's returned from the hospital after Alberta's death with the little baby in his arms. And Rose says, "Okay, Troy, you're right. I'll take care of your baby for you. Because like you say, she's innocent. And you can't visit the sins of the father upon the child. From right now, this child got a mother, but you a womanless man." Hence, when Rose stakes her claim right there along with him, we see how Wilson writes that not only do you need both halves in order to complete the whole, but both sides of the story must be told. And they have to stand and confront one another hand in hand, heart in heart together in order to make this closure, to make this claim, to make this change. I reflect on, and I'm not certain, Patrice, I think you were there. Patrice, you were there, but for those of us who had the honor of attending last month's August Wilson Symposium, and I think about the wonderful, wonderful speech that Michelle Shea, that keynote, right? And I was sitting there as I'm listening to the keynote. So I hope we can talk about this, about how she was so open and vulnerable and talking about the Wilsonian experience, performing it, learning it. And if I may use just even that image and the ideas that Ms. Shea presented, it was in that moment of that keynote that I realized that oftentimes as Wilsonian scholars, particularly those of us who are writing about Wilson, who are not theatrical scholars, oftentimes we don't get to talk about the how Wilson transforms us and transfixes us from the inside, right? We're talking about him in a scholarly sense, but what I know when I read every person's articles, when I read the books, when I go to the conferences, today's wonderful consortium presentation shows us that spirit, that as my colleague this morning began this wonderful consortium month, we say, Wilson was anointed, he's touched. When I think about the way, the passion that the other three presenters before me spoke about, Melonnie and Khalid and Chris, about how we all come together. And it's that passion, it's that, not to make him ascend on his birthday to a godlike status, but it's that overview, that cultural connection that allows us to understand that without Troy, there can't be a Rose. Without Rose, there can't be a Troy. Without Fences, there can't be a Joe Turner's. And without understanding the power of Wilson's plays, particularly all 10, when they're arranged chronologically or when they're written in the order in which they're written, he's giving us a blueprint. He's giving us a way to find ourselves, to find our song. personally, whether it's professionally, whether it's casually, regardless, he's giving us that space. I want to conclude, Patrice, if I will, but as I conclude, also, if you allow me to share screen, I did kind of put together just a couple of images that I want to go back and reflect on, that I think demonstrate some of the points that I wanted to make. And I didn't want to use the images as I was speaking because I wanted to kind of put the words out there first and then come back. But to conclude, thus, as Wilson has taught us, the future will not be a repeat of the past. This is what his work has done for me. I've gone there to know there, if I may return to my Hurstonian quote, one of my platforms. I've gone there to know there the whys of Troy. I understand Rose's Black feminist womanist informed words and actions. I'm no longer a naive voyeur of Wilson's world and characters, but their lived experiences I have grown into and accepted as my own. These are my folk. These experiences shape their individual philosophies, enable them to say that I'm not sorry for nothing I've done. And I am no longer sorry for what I've experienced. Each high note, low note is a part of my song, my cultural identity, my personal road to growth and maturity. As I reflected on this invitation to discuss these texts today, my thoughts continue to focus on the words, thank you. Thank you because they resound with the reverence and appreciation that I feel and know that I emit when I read Mr. Wilson's words and note how they have shaped my professional career, cultural insight, and my own journey as an African-American female mother, teacher, scholar. Mr. Wilson has enabled me, has enabled me to find a series of songs buried within myself. His work provides works for my colleagues and for myself with numerous opportunities, no, not opportunities, you all, instructions to discover our power, prophecies, and promises. Thus today, I ask and I thank you for allowing me to discuss Wilson's Fences and Joe Turner's Come and Gone as both two of his most seminal works, but also as my own professional and personal guideposts. Please spare me a few minutes to say again, thank you, Mr. Wilson. I'm finding my song. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I'm learning not to be sorry for nothing I've done. So if I can get the PowerPoint queued up, and am I allowed to share screen, Patrice? I'll try it. Let me see if I can try it. Yep, I have access to it. Okay. So the images, as I said, I wanted them to come later because I think that they allow us kind of touch points to go back on and to try to make some sense of the way I've tried to position Wilson and his influence, and maybe even also introduce a third component, and that is how, to deal with the words of intentionality and responsibility that his canon, and these two works in particular, but his entire canon bring about. So I begin this proud presentation with a reminder that, I have come to learn as I matured through my own life, being a Wilson scholar and being a human being on this earth, that everything is intentional. But yesterday was Ma Rainey's birthday. And I think about that, today we're celebrating Mr. Wilson's birthday. But again, that connection, right? Them, being born, of course, Ma Rainey was born in 1886. So we're talking about them being born in different centuries, but still that one day, right? That 24-hour window. As I reflected on that, when I discovered this, I'm like, this again speaks to the power of when the universe speaks, right? When everything comes in order. And it goes back to, I think, the spirit of today's conversation. Everything that he gives us is intentional. I think whether he knew so or not. But as we continue to discover and rediscover, and as I think about Melonnie and Khalid's presentation, why it's so important to understand history and how that little nugget could inform and shape a whole production, right? Understanding the connection between Wilson and Ma Rainey, not only through the blues music and his celebration of blues women, such as herself and Bessie Smith, but also with him highlighting that experience. And I purposely chose this very canonical or seminal picture of her with her band, because again, not only does it demonstrate, you know, that the play emanates with her being the cameo character, but at the same time that Wilson cannot, he never has told one story without telling one other side of the story. Then again, just to reiterate, and this goes back to again, the wonderful session with Melonnie and Khalid, and I didn't even know it was going to happen this way. But you know, Wilson and Hurstonian influence, right? You know, we talked. I loved our Q&A about the folk and organic intellectualism, but also how, you know, Hurston in this conversation that he's having with Wilson is both a poet person who's celebrating the stories of the individuals, because we talked about Chris reminding us about Wilson going to the coffee shop and just writing down dialogue, writing down what these people are saying. So we understand how he's getting into the souls of the people, right? And then also a slide that I didn't make is to remind us that, you know, W.B. Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk was published in this particular month, right? So again, Wilson's birthday, Wilson's other muses. So we talked about the blues, Baraka, we talked about Borges, but his other muses that we still have opportunities to talk about, with Ma Rainey being, you know, the day born before him, and then the Souls of Black Folk being published in the month of his birth. I just think all those things are opportunities to talk about the intentionality and the responsibility that we have as Wilson scholars to connect these moments. Again, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, I used one of the original published covers here to go back and celebrate how this is the work that put him on the map. But as we know, he was already writing poetry, as we learned from Dr. Shannon's wonderful text and all the scholarship, right? That he had already drafted Fullerton Street, which kind of becomes an installment in some shape, form, or fashion into this American Century cycle. And then I used the playbill from the production of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom that I got to see on Broadway, where Charles Dutton reprised the role of Levy, and where Whoopi Goldberg stars in the role of Ma Rainey, and just being there, thinking about a Charles Dutton who is about 20 years older than the original age, but still getting that same force that enabled us to, you know, relish what Chadwick Boseman gives us, and Viola Davis in the latest production. And again, I'm definitely not one who does self-promotion at all, because that's not it. But just to remind myself, when I talk about my bookends, Fences was the first text that gave me the opportunity to really delve into Wilson. And going back to my point, locate him where I was, because I think that's what it is. His stories are very culturally based. They're still just, you know, the universality is there, but I think also specifically when we talk about ourselves as Africana people in different parts of the country, different parts of the world, realizing that although Troy, as Chris reminded us, is set in I thought it was fascinating that Chris reminded us is that Fences is set in Pittsburgh, but Wilson never says that in the setting, right? He says it's a northern industrial town. We just know. So I'm like, oh my goodness, I need to note that. But this same northern industrial experience is 11 years later going to manifest itself in a way to where Troy is able to drive the truck, but Black men in Memphis in 1968 were killed on the back of the truck and was still fighting for equality. And just to kind of aside, was probably no more than about 5 years that those same African-American men, as an aside, finally were given their pensions that they lost when they lost their job. So just imagine how Wilson is so prophetic in this whole thing. This is one of the pictures, you know, this is literally how they traveled on the back of the rubbish trucks, and that caused the death of those men, that spurred then Dr. King coming to Memphis, not once, but twice. So again, how, you know, Wilson is writing about the Pittsburgh Hill District. He's writing about these cultural moments. He's writing very much what he's archiving these moments for us, but he's given us these times. As he said, I'm not writing about history directly, but I want those historical moments that shape us. And that's where the influence comes in. That's where I can now understand better the men in my family and their silences and their traumas, why I can understand roles and why the church continues to be not only an important part of Wilson's canon, but why that's the place where she finds solace in the midst of her storm and this sort of thing. And then lastly, the most recent one is where I got a chance to really, really immerse myself in Wilson's favorite text, and that's Joe Turner's Come and Gone. And this is where all the roads began to converge, right? All the time that I've spent as a Wilson scholar and have revered his work and loved being at every conference that I could and learning from everyone, where it all hit home that, wait a minute, Wilson is speaking to me. Because as we know, Joe Turner's Come and Gone is actually influenced by a folk song that women around the Memphis area, Memphis, Tennessee area used to sing, that was called Joe Turner's Come and Gone, that later was co-opted into the commercial form of blues by W.C. Handy. But in the song, in the original folk song, and again, I'm only repeating the scholarship and also what I've written, the women use that to explain when their men go away. Handy then commercializes the song right there on Beale Street, which then becomes, sold and commercialized and sent to New York and Pittsburgh, but he commercialized it. But this time it's a man who's more like a rambling man, not one who's been impacted by the convict labor system. So again, having that very personal connection to the space and time makes me think back to, again, Chris's presentation about why it's so important that the August Wilson House is being preserved, right? I remember when, and all of us were together when we had the opportunity in 2018 to go to the block party and to stand in front of the place where August Wilson lived and walked. That was our own pilgrimage home. And that's an experience that I will never forget, and that I look forward to, like all of you all, going back, especially now that the archives are working with those 400 and some odd boxes of documents, to touch the things he touched, to see the things that he wrote, because that's the way that we can pay homage to him. And I like to end this portion with, I think, one of the highlights of that whole experience, along with meeting so many wonderful people such as Patrice and reconnecting with Melonnie. And that's when we visited that artist's, rendition of Aunt Esther's Red Door. This red door is not the fence, but this red door is what opens you, if I may quote badly from the play, to that life that's an adventure that Wilson's work brings you to and reminds you of, whether male or female, young or old, the opportunities to prepare yourself, to welcome yourself, to be able to go from Aunt Esther and Jim the Ocean to understanding why it's so important that by the time we get to Radio Golf, to see that the spirit may have dissipated a little bit, but it's not gone. And it's up to us to claim that. And that's the spirit that saves us, and that's the spirit that makes us live. So, a little shorter, Patrice, than I think we had planned, although we started like 5 minutes early. So I think I'm okay, but I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'm looking forward to any feedback, and thank you all for allowing me to meander through Wilson's work.
Yes, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm just checking in the chat real quick. Okay, so Melonnie says he's given us a blueprint, a way to find ourselves and find our song. Oh, such good stuff, Ladrica, love it.
Thank you, Melonnie. I appreciate that comment so much, because one of the things that I am, and I'm going to use the word struggle with, for lack of a better term, you all, that I'm struggling with right now is how to, or even why should I, at this point in my study as a Wilson scholar, disconnect the work from, if I must say, the therapeutic self-care that it's doing right now, right? I'm thinking, Patrice, about a question that I think that was asked to Melonnie and to Khalid, and it's like, what will Wilson be writing about now? And I loved all those responses, because, and even, Chris responded to it also, but I every day when I try not to turn on the news, right? Because that's what I try not to do. Every day when I try not to turn on the news and hear about something, I think about, okay, there are two thoughts I have. I said, first, I have to realize everything happens according to a wheel larger than I understand. And secondly, I have to understand that what I do and I don't do, I find myself quoting Wilson to people all the time, like as a form of healing, because we've seen what happens when we can heal, but that healing has to take place within ourselves. So Melanie, I appreciate your comment because he does give us a blueprint. I think that we have to be vulnerable enough to experience it. And as you know, particularly his Africana audience, right? So many of us are just learning these things. And because he gives you 15 history lessons in one play. You know, when you take students to a play, you like take notes because you need to go look at this, you need to go look at that. And each play gives you a new opportunity to connect it to another power and connect it to another historical lesson and then reconnect it to yourself. And if you don't do that, I think that's where I think, you know, you have to do it. That's why we have those Wilsonian actors, right? That's why we can get transfixed in Felicia Rashad playing, you know, Esther. She convinced all of us without the form of makeup, just using words. That's why we can be transfixed in, you know, Chadwick Boseman's recent presentation of Levy. Like, wow, like you sit there, you wanna strangle him at the same time you wanna hug him, you wanna love him. So, thank you.
Mhm. You mentioned in your presentation, and I never thought about connecting those two with King going to Memphis, Tennessee, you know, fighting for, you know, safe work space for sanitation workers. And I think it was also pay as well. I think it was a
Yes,
combination of two.
yes,
And then I'm thinking about Troy and Fences with him stating, you know, that he wouldn't have been able to get a home if it wasn't for what, you know, his brother, you know, suffered. So the idea of then, you know, in the 50s, him being a sanitation worker, probably not making enough to be able to even buy a home.
yes.
So like kind of like putting those two together. I thank you for even, you know, adding that connection that prior to that I didn't even really think of, you know.
Well, I appreciate that because again, it's one of those times, and if I can go back to again, Chris, by being in a space, one thing I think Wilson's plays does is that it demands that you understand culturally um, and historically where you are, right? And so historically, he gives us the decade. Um, and then he gives us the Hill District. But perfect example is that when you really study the Hill District, a lot of its demographics actually, you know, although it was a very unique space, a lot of the spaces kind of are found historically in other areas, north and south. Like for example, in Memphis, there was the Pinch District at one time had extremely diverse immigrant population along with African Americans. But unless you know that, you don't realize it, right? So I guess the second thing part I want to add to that, Patrice, is understanding about although Wilson is writing about the Hill District or writing within the Hill District, is that remembering that it's still a larger Africana story and that these individuals are coming from different places and walking through different places. So, you know, fences would have a different feel if Troy was fighting this fight in 1957 in Memphis, right? But you know what he fights for comes to fruition in 1968. You know, so it's that kind of thing. And that was the thing that was so much fun for me about like, wait a minute, you know, I've been blessed to be in a space where this is part of national culture, right? Everyone knows that Tennessee, Memphis is a place where Dr. King was assassinated, but then going back and like, wait a minute, it's the same thing that Troy is fighting for. And again, I wish I had have done more with it within the space of it. And I'm looking forward to being able to do so. But yes, it's the larger the moments that he gives us.
Right. So I'm gonna go to the chat one moment. So Kamika says, very powerful presentation. So as a Wilsonian scholar and African American woman, how do you critique Wilson women characters?
Thank you so much for that, Dr. K. You know, I'll go back to it. You know, when I was 22 years old, and I'm going to be very personal right now. When I was 22 years old, and the first time I read Rose, I was angry. You know, I'm like, oh, I would have never taken that. You know, not understanding that. You know, when you're 22, you are 22. Like, right. I mean, and I think we all can relate to that, right? But just like, I would never, you know, and of course you learn by experience. And then when you sit down, you're like, wait a minute, you know, and if I can give an example that's oftentimes caricatured rather, Dr. K, or stereotypical, you know, but then when you really are old enough and you attend your first funeral and you understand what's going on, when you understand who's sitting on what side of the church, who's coming in the door, you know, I think about my own grandmother's funeral and learning about cousins I didn't know existed. And then, you know, all this other kind of, it's like, wait, how did all this happen? Right. And so that's when you really begin to understand those histories of those women, you know, like Rose and like Black Mary, who's gonna stand up to citizens like, you know what, you know what, you just want me, right? Or that's what you want, you know. So I guess to answer the question more specifically, how do I critique them? I don't critique them anymore based upon that 22-year-old's perspective. I think that Wilson's women are grown women, right? They are grown women who have experienced, just like Janie Crawford in Hurston's work, love, loss, death. They have said no, they have said yes, and they endure, and the word is they survive, right? And if I may co-opt a term and decolonize it, the self-care that Wilson's women practice is a whole other, and I'm looking at Melanie's question, like, is a whole other way of us to go back and support these women and understand, going back to Michelle Shea when she played when in Seven Guitars, right? When she's you know, when she's advising, you know, her friend, you know, don't let a man leave you shooting first. Like that's coming from some real experience. So, you know, these are women who Wilson, I think, is revering, and critiquing and understanding that this is what they go through and this is why they stay. So it becomes reading his women, and again, we have lots of scholarship out there, right? But I think now reading his women as these surviving women and these women who are really committed to uplifting the whole community, makes us understand, you know, why even at the end of, and maybe you all him at the end of King Haley II, we still don't really know whether King's baby is going to be born or not, right? Because, you know, she's threatening to have the abortion, but now King is deceased. Is that legacy going to continue to live on? We don't know. But just even bring it to the point to where we can have that complicated discussion in King Haley II about abortion that we won't talk about, that we can't talk about prior to that. So I guess to answer the question, Dr. K, they're powerful women whom I see in my family. They help me to understand those stories that are still not being told.
Another question, Melanie. I appreciate you mentioning the healing potential and implications of Wilson's work. Professor Shea mentioned healing powers also. I think it's important for us to highlight and teach how Wilson's characters encounter their own versions of healing and how we can learn from them.
Yes. You know, Melanie, and that goes back to this term. And again, it wasn't something I came up with. It's actually come up with doing research with a student this semester for her Africana Studies capstone project. And, you know, it was about, you know, healing and activism, right? About how you have to be healed, and listening to an amazing webinar and participating in healing session by, it was African American, how AA, I think it's AARPF, I can't remember. If I could find it, I will send it to Patricia tonight. It was an amazing consortium of Black female scholars who talked about, you know, how our healing practices within our community, particularly when it came as it pertained to Black women. But this whole idea of decolonizing self-care and healing has really become central to us in the midst of the pandemic and then all the trauma that we've experienced in the midst of this. And so to think about it, Melanie, in the sense of decolonizing it is what Wilson gives us, right? I mean, when you know, Aunt Esther takes Citizen on that city of bones, and when Bynum does the exact same thing, when he ushers, when he explains to, Loomis what he's going through. We have to remember that they're participating in this, but people are also witnessing this also. So you have to go backward to go forward, and that backward is that internal is where the spirit is healed, because you can have a healed cut, but if you still always look at that cut and it's still, you can still feel that first initial slice, then you haven't healed, right? Or if I can, I can't remember who it was. I think it may have been Yana Bazan, but I'm not sure. But you're healed when you're able to talk about it. When you're able to talk about it. Yeah. When you're able to tell these stories. And so for Wilson, telling these stories becomes, I think, a platform for other people to be able to heal. For the Wilsonian actor, when they have, and I think about, and I think even with going back to, again, Miss Shay's wonderful presentation, in order for her to be able to master Louise and all the other roles that she's played, she had to go back and heal. When she said she had to go, she had to travel spaces, she had to go there. And so his work is literally like a sacred, it is not lit, like it's a sacred text. It's our text for healing. Levy doesn't want to tell that story about his watching his mother. He says it to throw it out, to combat, defend, like he tells her, you don't know my story. But when he tells that story, and you know that all the men in that story can relate in some shape, form, or fashion to it, we know we get it. I think even to Jitney, when when Lena is like, don't pick out a house for me, let me pick that out for myself. She's asserting her voice. So yes, they're able to stay together because she's healed. She's like, you hurt me, that hurt me. I'm going to tell you you hurt me, and now we're going to go forward. So the healing is essential to understanding this.
Melanie, she also says yes to the question and answer about Wilson's women. The old folk used to say, just live long enough and then you'll understand.
Girl, is that not a preaching moment? You talk about testimonies. What? That's why when I thought about when Khalid said his grandmother, her response, to seeing it. These are their lived experiences. This is why I love our people, because when we see it, we shout about it. And you're right, just live long enough. And I try to tell that to my young scholars all the time. I'm like, okay, you keep on. You're going to go there and you're going to know there. And I'm like, but I have to let you do it on your own. And it's very humbling, but it's also healing to be able to share it and say, but you can survive it. Yeah. You can survive whatever.
Also wanted to say, with Joe Turner's Come and Gone, which I have to admit, Gem of the Ocean and Joe Turner's Come and Gone is like my two favorite, right? So, but when I first read Joe Turner's Come and Gone, I was reading it and I just thought that Loomis was just, he wanted just to get his wife back, to get his family back, mm-hmm. And that was it. I didn't, and then when I got to it, I was like, it's not even about that. Wanting his wife is about, him wanting his daughter, needing, the daughter needing to be with his mother, and then him trying to find his own son, so it was more, so that, I don't know if I'm making sense with this, because I get overwhelmed when I think about Joe Turner's Come and Gone, because that's like a play that I had to read over and over. And every time I read it, I get something different from it, But this Wilson's whole concept of us finding our song, which I just think is just, it sounds so simple, but it's so deep at the same time. And what he goes through in the process of finding his song, and then that, him slashing his chest and that whole representation of that in the blood, and it's just, I don't know, it's just so deep. So I had to say, for my own selfish reasons, I had to have you come on because I wanted you to talk about those coming on.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. Joe Turner's Come and Gone is, and again, when I first started teaching in Memphis, the text that was in the undergraduate anthology was Fences. So, I would teach fences, and then it got to the point I would stop teaching fences. I was like, okay, I can't teach his fences anymore. I'm just gonna bring in Joe Turner's. And I brought it in because I'm like, wait a minute, this is a Tennessee play, right? So for my own selfish reasons, I'm like, let me do it. But when you get to those layers, and when I really, especially writing the small text, because it's a small, both of my texts are small, you all. They're not my magnum opus yet. Or what I can't look, I don't know my Latin, so forgive me. But in researching and understanding that Wilson, like in that Sarabin interview was one of the earlier ones, he's like, oh, I think Joe Turner's the favorite. But then as he continues to give interviews and he asserts, so it's good that you're right there. He's like, that's my favorite play. He said, because I was able to do more with that play. Like by the time he's writing Joe Turner, you have to remember Fences is doing his thing. It's going to win all his accolades. It's garnering that universal audience. I contend now, as I'm going to continue to write about Joe Turner, is that, and actually there are two things I'm going to add to that, but not only was it the play that he was able to do the most things, but it's the most cultural play, because that's what we have along with Jim the Ocean, but that's what we have, those African retentions, the Juba, the root worker, the spiritual, all that's colliding, right? It's just colliding, it's colliding. And then when you have Wilson reminding us, and this is part of my most recent project, you have Wilson constantly reminding us, particularly with Joe Turner being part of the early part of the cycle, because you see as you trace the development of the cycle, how we get further and further away from the Africanists, right? How we get further and further away from the Southerners. But in Joe Turner, it reminds us that, going back to Wilson's interviews, Wilson's, again, major contention that, one of the worst things that Blacks ever did was leave the South. And you said that people then and people now still get upset. But if you think about it the way Wilson's saying it, he's like, but look at what you lost. Going back to Sandra Shannon's essay, right? The transplant that did not take. Look at what you lost. So he's given us the opportunity in Joe Turner, Patrice, to come back and recover those things, which is why every time you read it, you find a different layer. But selfishly for me, every time I find a different layer, it resituates that play further and further in the South. And just to kind of give you all like a preview, next time you listen to or read Joe Turner, look at, remember the group Arrested Development? Mm-hmm. Listen to the lyrics of Tennessee. Speech wrote Tennessee after he had traveled to Tennessee to bury his favorite grandmother. A week after the funeral, his brother passed away. So he's writing about going back home to the South to bury a relative whom he had a kinship with that was unlike any other. And then a week later, he has to funeralize a brother. So even going back to Melonie's point, and I know we have a couple more questions, so I'll be quiet, is that even that song, we know how, Arrested Development, Everyday People, they caught all of us, right? That was, I'm kind of dating myself, but that was my time in college, right? That was the thing. But to understand that whole spiritual quest and to read the interview behind it is actually really interesting. So I think about how even Speech being, this northern boy, he's coming back home to the South. And Wilson does that with Joe Turner. It's the play that brings us probably the most, when it comes to the music, back to those African and those Southern retentions that allows us to have that blood's memory experience. Just like, wait a minute, this is important.
All right, so Morton, Ayo, I'm sorry, Ayo Morton. The link between The Wounded Healer and the woman in August Wilson's work is intriguing. Wonder if anyone has done this juxtaposition.
I would like to say, Ayo, first of all, hey, thank you for tuning in. There's so much work on Wilson, scholarship that is probably there. I try to keep up with it. I'm sure someone has spoken about it, but I think, again, the beauty of Wilson's work, as we all continue today, we comparing to Shakespeare, is that there's more to be done. So I could definitely see, and I know your own work, Miss Morton. I mean, I could definitely, see even more readings of the wounded healer and women in August Wilson through a womanist lens, right? It was how I did both, uh, of theological womanism, spiritual womanism, and then, literary womanism. And again, Wilson, never ascribed those terms to himself. He never prescribed those to himself, but that's what we get to do as scholars. So thank you for that. And Melanie, I'll send you a copy. It's on Amazon, but
Where can you purchase the book? So folks need to know.
no, that's not why I did it, you all. It's just
No.
do this, and I'm like, oh, thank you, Patrice.
So
Even the cover was so much fun because both books were published in England. So they're written for actually, audiences outside the United States. So I had to write, oh my goodness, Patricia, make me cry. They're written very formulaically. They're not, the text that I've been wanting to write is the one I'm working on now. But the cover for the Joe Turner's Come and Gone book, I just had to give them some ideas, and they came up, they have their own graphic artist. And so when they gave me the one with the signage, I'm like, that's it. Because it reminds me, if I can go back to Harry Elam's text, the past is present, you gotta have those two crossroads. And also it takes me to Two Trains Running, right? That wonderful image of the train track. So that's what Wilson does. So thank you all so much.
And we got 4 more minutes, but just before we close, I just want to say, and I'm glad Melanie mentioned this about the book, because when I wanted to get these books, I always try to support Black bookstores, right? But I have to say, and our Black independent bookstores need to step up, and they need to have, I understand that a lot of Black bookstores are small, they're not the Barnes and Nobles, and of course they're not Amazon, but you should have a theater, selection, right?
Yes.
And if anything, you need to have, August Wilson and, books such as yours, even if it's a small section, and so I'm just putting that out there because I think that we shouldn't have to go to Amazon, to order and support, our Black authors. So
I think that's a brilliant suggestion. I don't even think about it because, again, the last book, I had even forgotten about it. I walked outside, it was sitting in a box on my door because it was published in the middle of the pandemic. I was thinking about survival, right? Trying to make sure my students made it through. So it was a blessing to be reminded, like, oh, I was still able to finish, this in time for this. But I think you're right. And, I hopefully some of us on this call can have that influence. There's a new bookstore in New Orleans, you all, that just opened. It's actually named for James Baldwin. It's called Baldwin.
Okay.
And I'm looking forward to going down there in a couple of weeks to see what they have, because what they've advertised so far, are kind of like, really interesting. But the criticism, right? I think sometimes we don't do that, but I agree. August should be on every bookshelf.
I'm gonna be reaching out to, it's 2 Black bookstores in Philadelphia. One is called Uncle Bobby's and Harriet's Bookshop. So I'm definitely gonna be reaching out to them, about having, they should have your books, and Wilson's books or some, even if it's a small selection, you should have, plays. You shouldn't walk into a Black bookstore and it's like, no, you can't purchase a play. Like,
know what? That's an excellent suggestion. I think we all
yeah, so we can all, play our part and do that. Any book, Black bookstore in our community, reach out to them and like, look, suggest, these books, suggest, Ladrica's books. So I just want to say, I appreciate you for coming on. Your presentation was excellent. I enjoyed it. I've been learning from everybody. I feel like this is a little mini marathon.
Yes.
But it's been wonderful. Let me see. Melanie says we're
gonna support.
Support. Okay. Definitely going to support. So I just wanted to make sure I got everything from the chat. But thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And I'll be reaching out. But is there anything you want to close out with? We got 1 minute.
I just want to tell you all, thank you, Patrice. Thank you again for remembering me and thinking about me. This has been a pleasure today. I'm staying on for our next presentation, and then we're going to the next presentation. So you can put that in the chat before you leave.
I'm definitely going to do
that. After this one, that would be great. And thank you Thank you, Ayo. Thank you, Kim. Thank you all so much. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye. All right, so next up, we have James Ijames, who I'm getting ready to add on so he can come on and join us. Yay!
Hi,
How you doing, James?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. I love that background.
Oh, thank you. My little James Baldwin looking down on me as a writer, telling me to be better.
I think you're making him proud, but I'm finding my paper so I can go ahead and do my intro to formally introduce you. All right, so James Ijames is Ijames. James Ijames. It's been a long day. Like I said, it's been a mini marathon. So James Ijames is a playwright, director, and educator. He has appeared regionally in productions at the Art and Theater Company, the Philadelphia Theater Company, the Wilma Theater, Baltimore Center Stage, Mockingbird Theater Company, and People's Light in Theater. James's plays have been produced by Flashpoint Theater Company, Arbiter 3, Theater Horizon, Wilma Theater here in Philadelphia, the National Black Theater, New York City, Steppenwolf Theater, Definition Theater, Steppenwolf Theater, Chicago, Illinois, Shotgun Players in Berkeley, California, and have received development with Playpen New Play Conference, the Lark, Playwrights Horizon, Club Thumb, Villanova Theater, Wilma Theater, Azuka Theater, and Victory Garden. James is the 2011 F. Otto Haas Award for Emerging Artist recipient, and he has 2 Barrymore Awards for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Play for Superior Donuts and Angels in America, and 2 Barrymore Awards for Outstanding Direction of a Play for the Brothers Size with Simpatico
Simpatico, yeah.
Theater Company, and Dim of the Ocean with Art and Theater. James is a 2015 Pew Fellow for Playwriting, the 2015 winner of the Terrence McNally New Play Award for White, the 2015 Kesselring Honorable Mention Prize winner for Ms. Martha, a 2017 recipient of the Whiting Award, and a 2019 Kesselring Prize for Kill Move Paradise. James is a founding member of Arbiter 3, Philadelphia's first playwright producing collective. He received a BA in drama from Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, and an MFA in acting from Temple University right here in Philadelphia. James is associate professor of theater at Villanova University and resides in South Philadelphia. Ijames is the co-artistic director at the Wilma Theater in Philadelphia. Thank you so much for joining us, being a part of celebrating August Wilson, and the floor is open to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I was thinking, I was like, when did I first encounter August Wilson? I was like racking my brain, and it made me sort of like go back through my whole like journey of coming to the theater in general. I come from a family of people who are artistically talented, but none of them chose that as their profession. So I have an uncle who is an amazing musician, and my father is a really talented visual artist, and my grandmother as well. And so it was always something that was around me, but it just sort of like existed as art existed as a hobby, something that people did to pass the time. And when I was about 14, my grandmother was sort of frustrated with the fact that I was reading comic books all the time. And she was like, you know what you should do? You should write a play. And so at 14, I wrote a play called Jesus is the Reason for the Season. It wasn't a very good play, but it was the first play. And I kind of got bitten by the bug of like seeing other people say things that I'd written and mean it. That was really exciting to me, and was a really beautiful experience for me to have at a really young age. But I don't think I still didn't think of it as like something that people did for a living. I think at that time I wanted to be like a I think it was really popular for people to say they wanted to be marine biologists at that time. There was a lot of people that were saying that. I think there was a character on A Different World that wanted to be a marine biologist or something. So I was like, I'll do that. That sounds cool. I like the beach. And in high school and in middle school, I was really heavily involved in choral music and choir, and had a teacher named Jackie Robinson who was really, really influential on me as a person. She gave me free voice lessons all through high school. She was just an incredible person. And she was one of the first people to sort of like mention theater as something that I could potentially be good at. And she suggested that I take a theater class in high school, and I did. And in that class, um, I encountered August Wilson's Seven Guitars, not knowing who August Wilson was, and that he was in the process of writing 10 plays in this. I didn't know anything. I just knew that there was a play with Black people on the cover. And at my very white high school, I was like, this is probably something that I'll connect to. And I read it, and it just it really blew me away. Like the way that he uses memory as the structure. I'd never seen anything like that before in a play. I'd had to read like Julius Caesar by that time, and I think we had read The Crucible, and those are all gorgeous plays, but I'd never read a play that had that kind of scale and imagination in it, by any writer, let alone a Black writer. So that was the first sort of encounter. And then I saw the film, I think it was like a Hallmark original of The Piano Lesson, starring Alfred Woodard and Charles Dutton, and Lou Mayer is in it. Just a really astonishing cast. And again, not really understanding what I was coming in contact with. It was like, oh, it's a movie, and I know Alfred Woodard from other things, and I know Charles Dutton from Rock. Like didn't click, and it wasn't until I was in college studying theater that I really realized the sort of giant of the American theater that I was sort of coming in contact with and learning about. And I think in my sophomore year was the first time I got a chance to actually act in an August Wilson play, and it was uh, Joe Turner's Come and Gone, which remains my favorite of the plays. So I'm from originally from the South. I'm from North Carolina, and I went to college in Georgia. So the South is really important to me. There was something about Joe Turner, the story of people who had moved from the South to the North, who were trying to, make a way out of no way, in this really hostile, different environment that I just really connected to. And I also come from a family of people who practice hoodoo things, but would never call themselves practitioners of hoodoo. But they're constantly like throwing salt over their shoulder, or, pinning something to something, or throwing a pot of dirty water out the back door on New Year's Day, which I do. I do that to this day. So all of that sort of magic that was the veil between the spiritual and the physical in my real life was really, really thin. And so when I encountered that play, and the part I was cast in is Bynum, because when you're in college and you sort of are short and a little bit too sort of serious for your age, you get cast as the old people all the time. The entire time I was in school, I played people who were 30 to 40 years older than me, like consistently. And Bynum as a character just felt like a glove. I went into that audition and I read those lines, and it felt like meeting a friend. And I knew men like that, and I knew women like that. And I don't know, it was such a beautiful experience to have that kind of poetry that you could have access to, those characters that are so rich, and these plays that are really difficult to climb the hill on. Like they're not easy plays to perform. So when you're like, you know, essentially a child still trying to figure out how to play these sort of behemoth characters, it does something to you. It sort of changes you. And so that was my first experience, and I loved that. And it felt it felt like a spiritual experience. I felt like I had been sort of awakened in a way. And then that same year, Morehouse decided to give August Wilson the Candle in the Dark Award, which is this prize that Morehouse gives out annually. And so we all were reassembled to perform the Juba scene from A Raisin in the Sun for August Wilson. And it's the one time that I met the man. And you know, when people talk about someone or you read about someone for a long time, and then you meet them in person, he was quite literally a very tall person, but he just felt like he was 10 feet tall. And his way of speaking matched the sort of soulfulness that I felt in the writing. And it was life altering, like to get to do those words in front of the man who wrote them was really, really special. And I think it ignited something in me about my true desire to want to be a playwright. You know, the gateway drug to theater is always acting. Like that's the thing that sort of gets you interested. It's like, oh, I get to be in front of people and people might clap, they might clap. And it was really lovely to have this realization that I like acting, but I really want to write stories. I want to write something that is big and takes history and makes it feel really present tense. And so that was the moment when I started to like really think about what kind of playwright I wanted to be. So in college, I wrote a couple of plays, one called Spin Cycle, which was sort of a comedy about a guy who's down on his luck and he meets a woman who's a little obsessive in a laundromat. I think I was writing about a laundromat because I was having to like take my clothes to go to a laundromat on a regular basis. So it was a space that I was like interested in, and there were interesting people in there always. And that felt like August Wilson sort of like taking a location that we think we understand, like a diner or jitney operation or boarding house, and taking those people and really lifting them to the level of like, you know, grandeur, of royalty even. And then I wrote another play that was based on the myth of Osiris, called Osiris Redux. That was a little bit more ambitious and was more about mythology than it was about history. And so I continued to write all through school, writing mostly small plays. I graduated from Morehouse and then went to Temple University to get an MFA in acting, mostly because my acting teacher said, you probably won't get into an MFA playwriting program because you're too young, and they usually don't take people right out of undergraduate. And at that time, that really was the reality. It was actually a lot harder. I think now lots of people go immediately. But she advised me to audition. She was like, you'll definitely get into an acting program. And I'd gotten into a few. And Temple, I went to Temple because I knew that Temple was near Freedom Theater. And I knew that Walter Dallas was the artistic director at Freedom Theater. And I wanted so desperately to meet and work with Walter Dallas, and specifically meet and work with Walter Dallas on an August Wilson play, because I know he'd had a big impact on the development of many of those plays. And so I came to Temple and didn't do any August. Oh wait, no, I'm lying. I did Jitney while I was at Temple. Again, playing Becker. I was the oldest person in the cast again. And I mean, that play, directed by Ozzie Jones. I don't know if you all know Ozzie Jones. Ozzie Jones is an incredible interpreter of August Wilson. incredible interpreter of plays in general. Um, and you know, we did it at Temple, and then we took it on tour out to State College, out to Penn State for an August Wilson festival out there. And that was the place where for the first time, I saw many different August Wilson plays all at once. I saw a production of Fences out there that was just one of the most astonishing things. To this day, it's a production of that play that I think about and I mull over, and I probably unconsciously steal things from, because it was just so magical. I saw a full production of Seven Guitars while I was there. I saw a full production of Ma Rainey while I was there. It was really, really a special experience to see all of that August Wilson and then have people come see us do it. And then I graduated from Temple and started working in Philly. Still going to see Walter Dallas's productions of Fences and gosh, what's the other August Wilson he did at the Arden? He did a few productions at the Arden that were really beautiful. Yeah, so I didn't do any August Wilson professionally. Actually, I don't think I've ever piano lesson. Thank Kamika. Kamika's here. Oh my God.
Been with us all day.
Now, this makes me happy. Okay, I'm gonna tell a story about that trip to State College because Kamika drove us there in a van. It was so fabulous. We got lost a couple of times, but she got us there. It was a fantastic experience. But yes, piano lesson with Stephanie Barry was in that production. And there was another production of Fences that he did there. I have never actually done a professional, as an actor, I've never professionally been in an August Wilson play. I've only done it in educational settings. I feel really sad about that. And now I don't really act much anymore. So I don't know if I will or not. I hope so. I hope that once now that I'm 40, I'm like moving in the direction of like some of the parts that are kind of exciting that I was too young to play when I was starting out as an actor. I'm moving to the age where I can play some of those other parts. I'm hoping to come back to him at some point because he feels like home. After I graduated from Temple, I directed a production of Seven Guitars at Rowan University with some really wonderful students there. That was a really beautiful production. The chair of my department at Villanova right now, Valerie Joyce, she did the costumes on that production. So that's how I met her, and that relationship sort of has gone a long way for me too. And then the most recent production of August Wilson's that I've been involved in was Gem of the Ocean. And Terry Nolan at the Arden came up to me a few years ago and was like, I think we're going to do Gem of the Ocean. And I was like, ooh, okay. Who's going to direct it? And he said, well, we were interested in you directing it. And I was like, I'm really afraid of that play. And he talked to me for a while about it before I ultimately said yes. But I think the reason why I was afraid of it is because it feels like a magic spell. It feels really literal in a lot of spaces, and it's big, and you have to have an Aunt Esther that can do it, and you have to have a Citizen Barlow that can do it. And I wasn't sure, and I also was like, a relatively young director. I'd only directed a few other things, and this was a really big play, and it was on the biggest stage at the theater. And so ultimately I said yes, and then we set out on the journey of finding first a Citizen Barlow, which we found in Akeem Davis, and he was really fantastic and did a really beautiful performance in that. Sorry, sitting all day sort of makes me a little gassy. And then we went out to find our Aunt Esther, and we found Zahara. And when I tell you, it was instant. she walked in the room, and I'd seen maybe a dozen women. She walked in the room, and she sort of looked at me over her glasses like that. I was like, oh, that's really intense. And she said, do you have anything for me? And I was like, no, I just want to see what you're going to do. And it was just there. It was just really there. It was undeniable to anybody in the room. And we were off. We decided to do the production with a set that had no walls. That was a design decision that I made with the set designer, Tom Weaver. And the reason why we wanted a set that had no walls, mostly because we were in the midst of a moment of national reckoning about whether or not we should build a wall on our border. And I was thinking about Aunt Esther's house as being a refuge, and that it doesn't have walls because it's a space where people come to be safe, and that the lack of walls was sort of representative of like anybody from the audience could wander in, anybody from backstage could wander in. There was this very open space, and it also makes the performance have to be sort of multidimensional because it's in a deep thrust, so people can see you on a lot of different angles. No one person has there's no one single view of it. You have to think about the play from a lot of different angles, and I think that that's true of August Wilson's plays in general, and specifically of Gem of the Ocean. The other thing that we wanted there to be no walls, but then we wanted there to be some sort of representation of ancestors. And so there was this thought of having, first it was going to be sort of like dirt and gravel sort of bound in this like mesh that would have these sort of light elements in it to sort of like make it sort of ghostly. And then Tom had this really great idea to commission someone to make these essentially slightly over life-size bust and put them in a pool of water. And I was like, well, if you put a pool of raw water around the stage, I'm going to have actors step in it because we have to. And the moment in the play when they go to the City of Bones, which took us almost a full, 10 out of 12 day of tech to get it down. It was just really magical to have like these representations of ancestors sort of standing between the audience and the performance, between the audience and the story, submerged in this water that then we trouble as actors. And the actors are moving through the water and they're singing and there's water coming down from it was really important to me that the magic didn't feel suggestive. The magic felt real, that the magic felt like something that Black people have been calling on and has been sustaining us for 500 years. I wanted it to feel undeniably real. And so that's what we did. And it was, every night that I sat in the theater to watch it, the audience, I would watch the audience come in and look at the bust in the water. And I don't know, I really do feel like it taught people how to receive the play. Because there was this relationship between these people, and you start to like, when you see a bust of someone, you start to like imagine what their life was like. You start to imagine what their voice sounded like. And that's in the room. That's before the lights even go down. There's an ocean sound going, and then there are these people who are looking at you. And so when we get to that moment where he's like going to the City of Bones, we're like in the City of Bones. The other moment in that production that I'm really proud of is the ending, which was this beautiful moment where Brian Anthony Wilson, who I think spoke earlier today, Brian played Solly. And Solly passes and they have him on the table. And I was like, Brian, what if you got up as Citizen is leaving, what if you stood up and you stepped down into the water? Like if you went to the City of Bones and you held up your coin. He was like, yeah, let's try that. And it just worked. It just sort of like allowed me to take August Wilson's like vision and like extend it a little bit past what I'd seen in the play so far. I think the job of the director is to extend the theatrical imagination of the play. And so what is the way in anything that you're directing that you can take what the playwright has given you, which is this gorgeous gesture of like trust. I'm writing this thing out. I'm going to give it to you. And even after I'm gone, you're still going to do it. And I trust that you're going to handle it with a great deal of care. How do you take that and you bring it directly into your moment in time? Like, what are the set of things that you're going to do to extend the theatrical imagination of that play? And for me, that ending was one of the ways that we were able to do that. And so I'm really proud of that production. I'm sort of like trying to get him to let me do Ma Rainey's Black Bottom because it's the other one that I really want to direct. But we'll see. I got a good idea for that one too. And also, I want to. Can I ask you a real quick question? What time should I start taking questions and stuff?
Like around 4:45, or if we can do it however you want to do it. We can, I can jump over into the. No one's is nothing there right now, but
Okay.
Yeah. But
Cool.
like around 4:45, we'll check in and just see. But I have some questions too. So.
Awesome.
But,
Awesome.
yeah, go ahead.
So, August has been a big inspiration for me as a writer. My plays use magic in a very similar way, but I also am like coming from a different point of view and coming out of a different time. But I always go back to him as like the ruler by which I'm measuring pretty much anything that I write. And I've been really fortunate, people have gone with the sort of ambitious and sometimes like really difficult to stage ideas that I put into the play. Like in my play Kill Move Paradise, the play requires like a wave frozen in time that people have to be able to run up and slide down. And that feels like really in line with the tradition of like the City of Bones scene in Gem of the Ocean, or the piano playing scene in the piano lesson. There's this play that's about to premiere at the Wilma called Fat Ham, which is a really, really loosely adapted play that's adapted from the play Hamlet by Shakespeare. That is essentially all of Hamlet, the entirety of that story inside of a cookout in the backyard of a family where the mother and the uncle have just gotten married. So it's essentially their wedding reception. And everything takes place at the cookout. I felt like that is kind of what it's like, right? Like the Black experience is like there's all of these things that happen in these moments of community and family and in sort of the larger community. And so that play, every time I look at it, because I've been having to watch it a lot because it's a filmed production, I see how much of August Wilson has had an effect on who I am as a writer and how I write, how I think about story and how I think about characters. And so I'm like grappling with that legacy, being really proud of like being in a tradition of writers who were able to grow up reading these plays from a very young age, to being somebody now who, people write to me and say, I read your play and it had this really great effect on me, or I found your play in my library at my high school, which is an email that I got that just sort of like gobsmacked me, because I'm like, that was me. That was me in high school looking for somebody that looked like me in these plays, and then suddenly there was one. And now we're in this moment. I think we're really in a renaissance of the American play, and specifically the play of the Black American experience, for better or for worse. I mean, I think that it runs a gamut of things that I think are really successful in that, and things that I feel like aren't. And I think we should treasure both of those things. I was watching the Oscars the other night, and Tyler Perry won the Humanitarian Award. I was just watching him, and I was like, this is a man who has made plays interesting to people again. Like, that's such a huge service that he's like offered to our industry and to our and to the form. Whether I like the plays or not, he is also a part of that tradition too. So I think, I think about him. I think about how he fits inside of the legacy of August Wilson, because I know that he's probably someone who read those plays at a young age, and it had a direct effect on him, because I can see August in his plays as well. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my story, and that's kind of my journey with August, and I'm hoping that it continues. And I really want to direct Radio Gulf for some reason. I think that's another play that's like complicated, and I think I got an idea of how to make that play really, really wonderful. So yeah, I don't know. I want to know what your questions.
Yes. But before I get to that, Ladrica says in quotes, he feels like home. And I think you had stated that earlier. So I just wanted to say that. But I mean, I just want to say my personal experience seeing, Gem of the Ocean. Again, I say that my two favorites are Gem of the Ocean and Your Turn Is Come and Gone. And when I seen at the art in that was part of their season lineup, I was just blown away. I couldn't get on the computer fast enough to get my ticket. And it's funny though, because usually when I go see a play, I never go by myself. Either I go to play with my mom or when they were younger, both of them. But now it's like either one of them. But now they're getting older, so I didn't want to go, so I went by myself. And it's the one time I really wish that I hadn't gone alone. And I'm saying that because the part where, and what do you call them that was in the water, the bus? But
yeah, they're just bust. Yeah,
right.
Heads, yeah.
And you can hear the water. I clenched like the seat. It was no one sitting next to me, so it was like me, and then it was an empty seat and another person. On the other side, it was an empty seat and another person. And all of a sudden, just like tears started coming down my eyes, coming down my face. It was so emotional, and I was just like when you. I mean, there's a difference from like when I read it. It was emotion, but then actually being there, seeing it's two totally separate things. And I started to think like I wasn't even thinking like if somebody see me or I'm a bit. It was just I was just so vulnerable. My feelings was just out there. It was just so powerful, genius having that, and I was just like, I wish this was. I wish I could go out and just bring people in here to experience that. I mean, I had never experienced anything like that. What was going on inside the emotions, hearing the water, hearing Aunt Esther, speaking to him. It was just unbelievable, unbelievable. And for folks who wasn't able to see it, I don't know what to say, but I'm just hoping that it can be done again. If it's not at the RN somewhere else, folks need to see that. Folks need to see that. And I just gotta I don't got a hat on, whatever, but I mean, that was unbelievable.
Thank you. It's all August's words. Like it's amazing the layers upon layers, and when you start to pull that stuff back, there's more. I love that moved you in that way, because I feel like sometimes theater has become sort of like intellectual in a way that I think is good, but I also am curious about like, can we still hit people here? Can we still like move people? That's really important to me. Catharsis, which is the thing that theater, that's why theater exists, is so that we can watch something and we go, oh God, I don't have to do that. Right? Like when you or we watch something and we go, oh yes, 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 I need more of that in my life. It is. Lucas does that so incredibly well in all of his plays. Not just sort of like, do you get the ideas of this? Do you understand like the critical race theory that is underpinning this? I want that to happen as well. And I also want someone to like make me weep. Like I go to the theater to cry. Like that's literally the one of the main reasons why I go. And so much theater right now feels really, really heady. I'm wondering after this moment we've just all been through, this sort of collective global trauma, I'm wondering if that's going to change. I feel like that's going to change.
Yeah.
That's my hope.
I want you to touch on that in a moment, but let me go to the chat. Kamika says, as a playwright who has written a number of phenomenal plays yourself, talk about the magnitude and importance of Wilson's 10-play cycle, and do you think that might be something you might try? That's a good question.
Oh, I think there's a generation of playwrights that exists because he wrote those plays. Like, and I'm in that generation of people who we met those plays at different points in our lives, but we all know those plays and we know them well. Like they're like the pinnacle, the absolute heights of what you could do as a playwright. Um, I don't I don't know if I could do what August did. I don't I think I'm too flighty. I think I you know you wave something at me and I'm like, what is that? I don't have the focus necessarily. Um, but I know people who are, I know people who are, of, my generation and older and younger that are interested in this sort of long experimentation on or meditation on a particular, place or particular experience. Um, I feel like Danye Love is a writer that's like doing that right now with his work. He's being really intentional about how his plays sit on a continuum, um, in a way that I think I'm a little bit too frenetic for. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know what I would do a trilogy, or I mean I probably could do a trilogy, that would be about it. I don't know that I could get past 3 plays. Um, yeah, that's a good question.
That's a good, yeah. But
That's a good question.
how do you you approach your writing?
Mm.
Some folks say, well, like say for instance, Wilson would say, a character, may talk to him and then he go from there. Or like what is your approach as a playwright?
Mm. It's usually like an idea or a person or sometimes it's just an image that I can't get out of my head.
Mm.
And it's just like stuck. Occasionally it's a line. It's unfortunately never a title. All of the titles of my plays are dreadful because I'm not very good at titling things. But I remember when I was starting Fat Ham, the first thing that I saw was this like conversation between the Hamlet character and the Horatio character about diabetes. And I don't know why. It just was like, or as they say, the sugar. I was like, why is this stuck in my head? These two people talking about this. And what I realized is that like, I'm writing a play about like legacy and inheritance. And I'm writing a play about like inherited trauma, inherited genealogy, inherited, genes, all of these things. And so this conversation around like one's health and one's like body is like a conversation about what you've inherited from the people that come before you. And that's what gave me the launch pad for the play, because I was like, oh, this play is about legacy. It's about upending the cycles that have been in a family for a very long time, which is also what I think Hamlet is about. The part of Hamlet that people don't really talk about is the fact that Fortinbras has come in the whole play. Sometimes this even gets a little like trimmed out of the play. But the reason why Fortinbras is coming is because Hamlet's dad did something dirty to him. So there's this like violence that keeps flowing through the family, and the ghost of Hamlet's father comes back and is like, you have to enact violence too. And in Shakespeare's play, Hamlet's like, okay, I'm gonna do it. And in my play, Juicy's like, but what if I didn't? Like, what if I didn't try to, enlist all these people to upend my uncle? What does that look like if I choose pleasure over violence? And yeah. So, but that play started with just those two people talking, and I couldn't get them out of my head. Or like with White, I had this this image of this white guy with this painting that's clearly not painted by a white guy. And white people's use of Black bodies and Black art as a commodity in the art world is something that I just find really sort of like gross and really painful, but at the same time really, really, really prevalent. And so I wanted to write a play that sort of took this guy that I saw holding this painting grinning to task. I wanted to take him to task. So that's usually how it starts, is like there's like an image or a person or a historical moment. In the case of Martha Washington, where I was like, oh, that's, her thinking that her slaves were going to kill her historically was like, oh, well, that's great. That's a fantastic play. Like, it's sort of like a comedy with horror. I'm into it. Let's do it. So that's where they come from usually.
Okay. What is your, right now, the state of Black theater, where do you think the state of Black theater is right now?
I think it's probably more, Black theater is more diverse than it's ever been. I think the number of plays by Black writers, both diasporic Black writers, writers from the continent, and writers in the U.S. and writers from the Caribbean. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this since I've been working. I think we're a lot more visible. Being a playwright right now is sort of weird, because it's like if you get any level of success, TV comes a knocking, and then they sort of spirit you away to Hollywood or whatever. And I'm not knocking that, because I'm trying to do that myself, but but it's it's a moment where there are all kinds of Black plays now, plays that I never would have imagined. I could never have imagined a slave play 15 years ago. I never could have imagined Sweat 10 years ago. I never could have imagined Passover 10 years ago. There's a lot of plays, whether you like them or not. The diversity of what is coming out of Black playwrights right now is enormous, and I think that's good. I think that is teaching our industry that we're not monoliths. We're not one set of ideas, that we're very, very, we're very diverse within ourselves. The number of plays written by LGBTQIA Black playwrights is huge. I mentioned Danya Love earlier. Like, there's a lot of people who are writing the Black perspective from really, really distinct personal places. And I'm just really excited by that. I think that serves all of us. And I think, moving forward, I think the future is that it's just going to get more and more diverse, more and more, um, idiosyncratic, which I think I think is a good thing.
Is the opportunities you think are the opportunities out there?
I think it's still pretty gatekeepery. I
Mm.
think it's still if you're in, it's a little bit easier. If you're not, it's a lot harder. I still think that that's not okay. Um, but I think playwrights who are willing to self-produce, playwrights who are willing to, make space for themselves. That was one of the things that I did, in my early playwriting career with Orbiter 3. And even with plays when I was in grad school, I directed plays that I wrote a couple of times when I was in grad school. Kamika directed a play that I wrote. Oh my gosh, Tobias, something Tobias. What was the name of that play? I remember this play because it was a lot racier than I meant it to be. This is the lamentable tragedy of Tobias L. something.
He says
I,
the lamentable tragedy.
yeah. That's what it was called. It was about this professor at a university that sleeps with a student. And oh my gosh, but also like he was a professor of Shakespeare, and oh my gosh, this is coming back to me. I completely forgotten about this play. And Kamika directed the ish out of it. It was really fun, and I actually got to act in it. It's the one time I've acted in a play of mine. Um, oh my gosh, what was I talking about? Oh, we were talking about access. Um, yeah, just like I think playwrights being entrepreneurial in a way that we historically have not been asked to be. We've been sort of waiting for someone to accept us. I think that's probably going to change. And then I think the pandemic is going to change the landscape really drastically. I think plays are going to get smaller for a little while. They're not going to be big musicals and things like that for a while. So who knows what we're walking back into? But my hope is that what was happening right before the pandemic will continue and only expand.
Right. So, what was your experience like having Move Paradise produced at the National Black Theater, Dr. Barbara Ann Terry National Black Theater?
Yes.
Can you talk a little?
Yeah, I can. That was so I wrote that play right around the time Tamir Rice was killed. Really, really quickly. I like wrote it in a week, and then I put it in a drawer because I was like, I wrote it kind of to metabolize my own anger. I didn't know what to do. I was sad. I was afraid, and I wrote this thing really, really quickly, and I put it in a drawer. And I think no one's ever going to do this thing. And Jonathan McCory at National Black Theater reached out and said, "Hey, someone said that you have this play that's about um, Black men being killed by law enforcement." And I was like, "I don't know how you found out about that." And then later I found out that I'd sent it to one person to like read it, and they'd been talking about it. And I sent it to him, and he really loved it. And he, got Saheem Ali, who's now the new associate artistic at the Public, to direct it. And it was great. We did a workshop first, and then we did a full production of it. And I was sort of there remotely at that time because I was still teaching at, I was at Villanova, so it was hard for me to just take off and go to New York for 3 weeks. And again, like this is another really great example of someone who like took the play and said, okay, I see what's here on the page. How do I like expand that? How do I make that bigger, more impressive than it seems on the page? And he created this set that was essentially audience on either side with these like letterbox openings, and the entire set was covered in two-way mirror. So you could see the people on the other side, you could see the actors sort of reflected, and then all of the lighting instruments shown through the two-way mirror. And that felt like what I was trying to get at, like that world of like, I can't get out of this thing. I'm sort of stuck in this space that is asking me to consider something, asking me to like figure something out, but I don't know what it is. And the only people I can depend on are the other people in the space. And the other people in the space look like me. And so I think Saheem did a really good job of creating the conditions of that, both for the performers in the act of playing the play, but then also the audience. You're implicated in the story in a way that's different if you're sitting in a proscenium where the play is happening there and we're all sitting out here. And the legacy of that space, it drips over everything that they do. So like you feel it when you walk into the building, you feel the history of that theater in everything they do. And so that also, I think people brought all of that excitement, all of that history to the play. And I think it served the play really beautifully.
Mm. So also, let me check. See if there's any. Okay, no. I wanted to ask you, and it just slipped my mind what I was going to say. Oh, so I had posted, I think it was this past weekend on our Instagram page supporting Fat Ham, and I said it was a play, but it's a film, right?
Yeah, but I mean, we can't call it a film.
Okay.
Like,
I was like,
for union reasons.
Because I put it as a recommendation, but I'm looking forward to it. But I know it's on Wilma's demand, right? On the
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's I don't know how much the tickets are, but it's starts streaming on Thursday,
Okay.
and then it runs to the end of May, I think.
Okay. And what was like, when did you come up with that? I think you spoke about that a little bit earlier, but can you just elaborate a little bit? But I'm not giving too much because we going to see it.
All right. I like that. Yeah, I first encountered Hamlet in college. I got cast in a scene from Hamlet in my sophomore year for a directing class at Spelman College. And I got cast as Hamlet, and it was the scene, though yet of Hamlet, our dear brother's death, the memory be green. It's when they're having the wedding reception, and Hamlet's like, I want to go back to school, and Gertrude's like, no, stay here, it's gonna be great. And then Horatio shows up later and is like, I saw your daddy last night. So I did that scene and really loved it, and had never read the play. So then I read the play, and it was like, this is great. And the play has sort of like stayed with me ever since. But I've always wondered why. I've only seen one Black Hamlet in person, and it was at the Wilma. It was Zainab Jah played Hamlet at the Wilma several years ago. And I just kept thinking about the play and like, well, who are the bodies that get to like inhabit that character? And initially I was like, well, I just would love to direct a production of it and cast it in a way that is a little unorthodox, or in a way that's not typical for this play. And then I don't know, I think I might have just had too much wine one night, and I was like, I think I'm just gonna like set this at a barbecue. And that's how it got started. It just was like, well, what are the beats of Hamlet that I need to make sure that I have in there? I need to make sure that the ghost comes. I need to make sure that there's a moment of crisis with Juicy and his mother. I need to make sure that there's a scene of complication with the Hamlet character and the Laertes character and the Ophelia character, and how does Polonius function? And I'm like in our production of it, or in our play, Polonius is a woman. Ophelia and Laertes don't have a dad; they have a mom, and that changed it. That changed the dynamic of the relationship, and so that was really exciting to me. And then I don't want to give away the end, but Hamlet ends with a pile of bodies, and I will say this: this play does not end with a pile of bodies, because I don't know how much Black folks need tragedy right now, so I don't want to do that.
See how it ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Before I let you go, I just want to say, I just want to ask you, for someone who's interested in directing or playwriting, like what advice would you give a young person, or just anyone who's interested in going in that direction?
Go see stuff and then talk to the people who did it after, if you can. Like if you can talk to a director that you really love and say, I really admire your work. Um, Seeing things, I think, is really, really important. Reading as much as you can, and not just theater. Read everything. Read, I was talking about critical race theory and feminist theory. Read that stuff, because those ideas really are the the underpinning for a liberatory theater. I truly, truly believe that. Um, hmm. Seek mentors, seek people. I think that's something that the fact that theater training has really been shifted to the academy. There's an assumption of like, oh, my professors are my mentors, and they can be, but I also wonder if there's a way to like find mentorship from people who don't teach you, or maybe you don't have a professor student relationship with. And I hate to keep bringing up Kamika, but Kamika is a really great example of that in my life, because I never took any classes with Kamika at Temple, but I probably spent more time with Kamika in a one-on-one mentorship relationship than I did with any of my professors while I was there. And it had a really profound effect on me. It really helped shape who I am. And so seeking out those mentorships, even if it's not even like an official sort of, I don't think I ever said to her, will you be my mentor? I think I just was like, what you doing? And just sat in her office until she told me I had to leave. And I think that's how that works. So finding those finding those people, um, you know, listening to people, as for playwrights, I think it's important to just you know tune your ear to how people speak, and how lots of different kinds of people speak. August Wilson talked about writing in a diner, and I think he did that because the people who come in and out of a diner, you're constantly being washed over with regionalisms, with ways of speaking, with idioms, with song, with you know tall tales and lies, and all of that stuff is material. All of that stuff is you know uh, yours. If you hear it, it becomes a part of you. Roland Barthes, who's this French theorist, talks about when you read a novel, it becomes your novel. So it becomes my Sula versus your Sula, my you know notes on a native son versus your notes on a native son. So that's the same thing with the people we meet in our lives. They become your version of them in your imagination. And those are the people those are the people that people my plays, are the people that I've met, the people I grew up with, the people who raised me, the people I went to church with. Listen, really truly listen to those people, because there's so much that you can gain from just sort of like taking in orally what the world has to offer. Um, I always talk about how I learned how to curse from just like listening to people in the barbershop. Like I learned how to cursing works in writing by listening to people in the barbershop, um, and like the different ways in which people use that language to get to a point, to get at something. So that's my advice. Meet people, make mentors, listen hard, read and watch everything you can get your hands on.
That's good advice. So, Ladrica says, excellent discussion and advice. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
in 2 minutes, if you could just say, it's been rough for, 2020 with the pandemic, with Black folks in general, with this, the civil unrest. But like I always say, Black folks is resilient,
Mhm.
and we still here. I'm here, you're here,
Yeah.
we still going through our things, but we're here. And I just want to ask you, what's one thing that's keeping you going, that you can
Mm.
hold on to, that, you know, um, you can say, well, when you get up every day, I know I can make it through the day. What is it, that one thing, whether it's a person,
Mm.
a thing, or, what is it for you?
Yeah. So in the middle of March, my younger sister passed away quite suddenly,
Mm.
and I think I had prior to that moment been hyper focused on work, hyper focused on success, all of those things that we're supposed to value. And then that happened, and I think about her every day. Like I can't, a day doesn't go and I don't think about her and something she said or something she did or the sound of her laughter. Um, and I feel like she's saying to me, live, live. Um, and I honestly think that's the thing that's saving me right now
Mm.
is is that sort of reminder that the time you have, you gotta invest it in the people around you, which is something that she did. Like care was how she moved through the world, and so I feel like I've like taken up that mantle to try to be someone who's more considerate, more loving, more generous, more compassionate. Um, and so just trying to keep her memory alive. That's the thing that's keeping me going.
Wow. That's a powerful way to end um, today's, celebration. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for being a part. I mean, everyone that I had, to be a participant today, they popped up in my mind for my own selfish reasons. But I think for my own selfish reasons, it's benefiting, you know, everybody. So I just thank you so much for being a part of celebrating August Wilson. Um, I definitely want to encourage everyone to check out Wilma Fat Hand is on
Yeah.
demand at the Wilma. And what is it? One more thing I wanted to say. Can you just give us a brief tease? Anything you're working on?
Uh, I'm in the middle of writing a play called Him that is about a trans man gospel singer in the 30s
Okay.
named Wilmer Broadnax. That is a gospel play. Um, so we'll see.
Yeah. Little teaser, so we gotta look forward to that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm so thankful that the art and reached out to you to direct the Gem of the Ocean. Because I'm gonna hold on to that and I'm gonna share that
Mm,
my experience with everyone. Because that was a
awesome.
powerful. So we have to that play. You have to direct that play again somewhere. I don't know where it is. I'm coming to it. But thank you
All right.
so much. I
All
appreciate
right.
it. Take
All
care.
right. All right. Bye.
Bye. Now in the chat, I put in August Wilson birthday celebration. We all, if you're able to, go over to the August Wilson house. They're having a celebration. It actually started at 4. But if you want to go there, you have to RSVP. So go to August Wilson birthday celebration.com. I just put it in the chat. You can go there, RSVP, and you can do the live stream. So head on over there because I'm about to head on over there. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you to Brian Anthony Wilson. Thank you to Khalid, Melonnie. Thank you to Ladrica. Thank you to Christopher. And thank you to James. I thank all y'all for being a part of the August Wilson Consortium's event today, celebrating August Wilson. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Take care. Bye.